Welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. We've got the Legendino who's over in Rio. And Legendino, we've got a really good guest with us to talk about a fabulous game, you must admit.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to talk today or do the ironing. Should we do the ironing? Irons.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Come on, you irons!
It's quieter than the hammering, isn't it? Let's be honest. So
Indeed.
it's probably a very wise move.
Yeah, okay. Would you rather be a hammer or a nail? Mark Webster, music critic and broadcaster. Would you rather be the hammer or the nail?
The sparrow or the snail.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, we are in principle the hammers, but we spend many seasons being the nail. And I think the phrase beaten a lot, obviously, would be operative in this particular instance. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Hammered would be better. Mate, you've chosen a cracker of a game, and I remember watching this live, actually. So it's kind of emotional as well, not least because of all the players involved, but the circumstances. I felt what I'm sure many West Ham fans felt on the day that you had to say goodbye to your ancient ground. We, the public, called it Upton Park, and it was only when it was unfolding all these people started calling it the Berlin ground.
I've never been there in my life.
Yeah, did anyone ever call it the Berlin ground? Because I never remember that. It was always Upton Park.
Of course it was. Yeah.
What happened? I think for good reason. It's not as catchy. It is definitely. I mean, the Bolin's there as the pub, and then again, there's also the Berlin.
Yeah.
So the pub is I think really the Bolin, mispronounced. That's still there now, and very she is too, which is caught as all part of the story because we're not there anymore because that part of East London needed pepping up.
It needed gentrification, and the gentrification had been a long time coming. Funnily enough, the great soap opera that's going to be 40 years old, I think, beginning of next year, EastEnders, which is kind of set in West Ham's area, landscape, as everybody knows, that didn't seem to catch up with the gentrification that I was seeing in real time because I was living in Hackney for many years, and which is just next borough along from a lot of the traditional sort of West Ham places. And I was like, whoa, we're getting priced out of here in the early 80s. You know what I mean? And you look at EastEnders, it hadn't caught up with that. And I wonder whether that was part of West Ham's undoing or undoing for many years because it couldn't compete at the Upton Park ground with really the gentrification of football elsewhere.
That I think that is the complete and utter answer to it all. And it had been broached before. I think probably 10 years or so before when every fan was presented with this. Well, it seemed like a choice, but in practical terms, it was a brilliant fait accompli where we would outgrown that space then as well. And the theory is that there were two options. There was going to be a bond scheme to raise money to improve Upton Park.
Was it called Billy?
That's right. Yeah, I'll have 50 billies, please. That's an absolute. Yeah, that's the perfect way of doing it.
Hard man.
Exactly. But the option they offered was the sunlit uplands of the Barking Super Stadium, in which it was basically sold to you as being, we're going to plop a ground in the middle of Raynham Marshes, possibly somewhere near a train station, but we're not totally convinced about that. So it was really kind of like saying, oh, how about we just improve Upton Park then? So all right then, let's do that. Can we have a little bit of money? So that's kind of what happened. But in the end, you're right. So we end up at, and this is kind of the broader part of why I hoped you'd find it interesting, is that moving grounds, of course, is, as you just pointed out, Don, a massive emotional thing.
Traumatic.
Yes. But it's also not the end of the world because it's happened so many times and often in the favour of fans and football teams. And just as a kind of broad stroke here, one of the big things for me was when we got the Olympics in East London at Stratford in 2012, there was an opportunity. What was likely to happen, as much as anything else, was we'd acquire the classic White Elephant Stadium that most Olympic stadiums are around the world. And I just thought it was crucial that the local football team filled that void to ensure that it became a living, thriving space. Because I can't picture what it would be like now, some kind of horrible, desolate hinterland now, if there wasn't us in there filling it up every home game.
It's history. It's history. We need to do a little bit of explaining before we get straight into this conversation, which will be fascinating, not least because, we have people listening to this podcast elsewhere in the world, not least in America. And I know from the emails I get from Americans, they love the history of football that they're often or many times one step removed from. So the emotion of being at that Upton Park Stadium is what we're talking about. And the moment you leave it, the last match, etc. As always on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, we do focus on a particular match. And Mark has chosen the very last match that was played by West Ham at Upton Park, their legendary stadium. It was against Manchester United, and we'll come on to all of that later on. But let's give people a little bit of that history, Mark. 1895 you've got on your sweatshirt. I'm presuming that's the date you lot moved into the Berlin Stadium.
Well, actually, that's why I kind of like the nature of these stories. It's 1895 is the year that the club's original name, as it were, Thames Ironworks, formed as a football club and became West Ham United. Initially, there were two grounds that aren't in East Ham, which is where Upton Park was. We're a team called West Ham United. Our football ground was in East Ham. Not a lot of difference on the grand scheme of things, as you say, on an international kind of scale. But even so, it just goes to show that these things are fluid. We used to play, I lived in Canning Town for many years, next door to the little park, which is called Hermit Road, which is where one half of the original kind of West Ham amalgamation, which is called the old Castle Swifts, and they had the claret and blue kit. They played there. Then 1895, West Ham as United were formed, and they played what's called the Recreation Ground, which is right next door to West Ham United Tube Station. 1904, we crossed the Great Divide and head east, and Upton Park Bowling Ground becomes our ground, our home.
So you are the Arsenal of the East End.
They are. Are they not Exhibit A of this conversation?
They are. As
any self-respecting Tottenham fan will tell you, North London's other team is from South London.
But they are in terms of stadiums and the gentrification of football, because they were the first of the London teams to upscale to the enormous size stadiums or stadium that they've got today. And I think once they did that, once they moved from Highbury to whatever they call it nowadays, the landscape changed in London dramatically, and the other teams, as we've seen with Tottenham, had to upscale as well. I mean, obviously, there are limitations for particularly Chelsea, I would say. You're not going to get it bigger than that because of where it's located, etc. But for all the other teams, they're looking at ways of trying to, match what Arsenal set a precedent of. And I'm not saying that there are comparisons, but, it was emotional for people leaving Highbury. It was really emotional. And I know people who bought flats in the Highbury compound just because they couldn't bear to tear themselves away. And they've only moved across the road or around the corner, literally.
I get the idea that West Ham's move was even more traumatic. Maybe it's because they spent longer there. And maybe it's because perhaps the Arsenal's identity is more cosmopolitan than West Ham's identity, which is very, very. Although Arsenal actually was the closest club to the old East End, isn't it?
Right. Good point.
But West Ham, that area of London, it's so sort of almost like a village. I always saw West Ham as almost like a village, which I think maybe held back the club for a while because the team that Ron Greenwood built in the mid-60s, they looked like they were going to be an absolutely fantastic side, and they were for like 3 or 4 years. And after that, that kind of we're just a little village. There was always like a lack of ambition coming out of them. Do you agree with that, Mark? And what does the ground, what does Upton Park mean to you?
I completely agree. I think its strength and its weakness is exactly what you just said. Its appeal to its core fan base, which I think brings with it a lot of romance attached to being East End and Essex diaspora. So that part of east of central London, heading out towards along the Thames and down to the sea, clings on to some kind of, I guess, romantic past in a lot of cases. And so much of this is tied up in the fact that it's the most bombed part of London during World War II. It's where the heavy industry was based during that time. So there's a lot of legacy there, multi-generational crossover. It's also been obviously one of the great areas for any new waves arriving in the country to come. So it's always had that kind of rich tradition as well. And tradition becomes the word, and you can simply pin your badge of tradition to the bricks and mortar of the space in which you play your football, can't you? Mm-hmm. If you choose to. And I'm very intrigued to know. I'm too close to the West Ham part of that argument to know whether it really had that same resonance with the hybrid of the Emirates. The bit I would conclude is that almost immediately Arsenal filled that space up extraordinarily successfully, whereas West Ham been a bit of more of a slow grind to make this place feel like we're meant to be there, as it were.
Well, it's probably a worse stadium, isn't it, for football than the Arsenal stadium, and also there was the promise. I know West Ham fans who were very much behind the move ended up doubting themselves because there was a promise of a great team that didn't really materialise. And West Ham are living that dilemma even now, aren't they? Getting rid of David Moyes. It's now we want to be bigger than that, and so on. I used to love the old Upton Park, and that dynamic of immigration that you just talked about. I took my Brazilian wife there exactly for this reason, because she was fascinated with it. Because you come out of the tube, and it's like there's a real Bangladesh feel about the thing.
Yeah.
And then during the course of the afternoon, the descendants of the people who used to live there come back.
Yeah.
And they kind of take it over again for a few hours.
It's the same in Tottenham, mate.
Yeah, exactly. But
it's not as
but somehow it felt
maybe.
even more in I don't know, because it's like the cramped streets, I don't know. But that dynamic came across so powerfully, I think, in Upton Park.
Obviously, it brought with it its problems, and terrible ones, from people for whom that wasn't a great thing, and we carry the scars of that even today. I think, hopefully, fundamentally healing, but because the crowd does nowadays so much more reflect the area that we're from. I feel, and again, I suppose that there would be the other part of the argument. We've moved out of a ground that held 30-ish thousand. But there was a demand. But that demand was always going to be met by the old school part of the crowd. It wasn't a welcoming space for new people who live around there to come and have a try themselves. We've doubled that size, and I think the crowd reflects that. Of course, what that also means is international ticket sales as well. But guess what? That's what football. Football can't hide its light under a bushel, can it? You can't pretend that it's 1870. It's just not that way anymore.
It will be fascinating to go through the eras of West Ham, and you alluded to it already, Tim, talking about one particular era of coaching. It's a really, really significant point, because moving to everything was serendipitously arranged for West Ham in a way. Tottenham almost put the kibosh on you moving to the London Stadium, because they wanted
which would have been the craziest thing can you imagine Tottenham fans having to travel to Stratford every other Saturday for their home games?
Apart from anything else, it's not big enough, because even what they've got now, which is the newest stadium in the Premier League, is full house. You know, you can't get tickets, not for Premier League games in any case. But the moving to the London Stadium, which, as you say, was the home for the 2012 Olympics, that was part of that gentrification that we talked about before. You know, it was part of it. You know, the
totally.
reason why we got the 2012 Olympics was because that part of East London, as you said at the beginning, needed a lot of work doing to it. And, you know, that's what the Olympics project is partly about, or should be about, or has been about for generations. Now, you moving there, does that reflect where the fans are? Because what you're talking about in terms of cultural landscape and the family sort of appeal, which is what I've always felt West Ham was about, apart from that moment when Skinhead came out, the book Skinhead came out by Richard Allen, and, you know, Joe, what's his name in Skinhead, is a West Ham supporter. Joe Hawkins is a West Ham supporter, and there's a little bit of a racist bit in there where he's been in jail, and since he's been in jail, West Ham have had a couple of black players, and he's not too happy about it, or whatever it is. I mean, apart from that moment in time where you just like associate West Ham fans with skinhead hooliganism, and I do remember, I'm sorry I'm going on a bit because I'm trying to navigate a lot of things that people may, because it's a different world now, that may not realise that the first place that I saw a black kid on the pitch, and I think you know who it is, Cass Pennant, more than likely, on the pitch, you know, invading the pitch, was at West Ham. I can't remember what it was, some maybe cup game during the week, or you know, European game during the week or whatever. But I saw, you know, this kid, black kid, and it was like, I was really fascinated by it. So, but what I wondered whether that sense of who West Ham are, which is like a Cockney family, if that is still there, or whether actually the fan base has now gentrified itself. And, you know, once you gentrify, you become more
well, maybe not only gentrified, but expanded.
Yeah, what I was going to say, not just expanded, but I was saying that the extended family dissipates, doesn't it? Once you move on from that, the local roots as well.
I think the
does that all make sense?
Word,
or did I talk
yeah,
too
no,
much
it does. But I think and I'm not trying to avoid the point. I think the simple middle word there is changed, for which I'm not uncomfortable, because I don't doubt for a second that it also changed generationally or every decade anyway. It's just that, again, when you're kind of in the middle of the beating heart of it all, you think that's all there ever was and all there ever will be. Well, it's not true. It would be ridiculous to say it's true. It's impossible for that to be the case. And what you've got now is, I on a kind of simple level, on a prosaic level, I would assume that pretty much the 25 to 30,000 who turned up every home game at Upton Park are still fundamentally turning up now, but there's now twice as many people. So that's either different people or, your word, an extended group of people. And the answer is it's got to be extended, because apart from the away section, they're there to cheer their team on. So no one gets bragging rights about being a better fan than the other fan. You know, no one gets you don't get to fill a questionnaire and say, yes, you passed. You are now a proper fan. I'll have none of that. I abhor that.
A new space creates new traditions, doesn't it?
Yes, another great point. Yeah,
the bubbles stay the same.
But they just don't reach us anymore. We're too far away.
Yes. When did you start going, Mark? When did you start going to Upton Park, and what does it mean to you?
It meant everything, because it was. So my mum took me and my brother, because my mum lived and was born basically behind the ground. So as her local team, we were living in Bournemouth at this stage. My mum and dad had a pub. My dad was from Stepney Green and born and raised Arsenal. And it would seem that logic dictates that the more we think about it, my brother, myself, and my mum, my dad's no longer with us, is that what he didn't want to do was have his day at Highbury ruined by a couple of ankle biters around him, demanding sweets and attention.
Yeah.
So it was on the behest. My mum got the job of taking her boys to football, so she took us to her team. Now, his version was, "Yeah, glory hunters, you only went there because of the 1966 World Cup final." But in reality, he had his cake and he ate it. He got to go to the Arsenal by himself with his mates. And initially, so it was my mum taking me. That would have been probably 67, 68, that kind of territory. I think a horrible 0-0 draw against Coventry on a ploughed field, and I think Billy Bonds missed a penalty. Just to really put the icing on the mud cake.
No wonder the habit took hold. No wonder.
Of course, I was smitten, wasn't I?
And do you remember the highs and the lows, or is it mostly the highs that stay with you? And are there any particular highs?
Oh, well, the game that we're talking about is a bittersweet one, but funnily enough, a lot of the lows have stuck with me, particularly poor seasons, particularly toxic atmospheres. And the reason I say that is I suspect that has helped me a lot with the notion of not being uncomfortable about changing grounds. Because if you listen to a lot of people, we only ever won 7-0 every game there. And it was Shangri-La, and it was always sunny, and they gave you 50 quid as you walked out. There's this kind of...
Yeah. What I remember was that the stands, as it was once upon a time, are right there, right by the touchline. Yeah. There's only a few feet between them. That's what I remember most clearly. That I've never been this close before. But yeah,
but it was my learning ground. I mean, that's, as you say, Tim. That's the thing is, I cannot. And again, it's sort of like the extended answer to your question would be, I miss it, but I couldn't. I'm too old. I'm not that guy. I'm not 14, 24, 34, 40. I'm none of them people anymore. So I'm perfectly happy having the man I was or the kid I was in that position when I was there. But I would feel really uncomfortable if I thought that's what I was trying to be every time I walked in there, is 14 again or 24 again. I'm comfortable with change. It makes sense to me. And I always say this to people. What made it easy for me was the very first game I went to at the new stadium. My two eldest grandsons came with me, Frank and Ron, obviously well named, two names that sound like at any given time you're going to hear their sentence about 3 seconds later as they stood in the dock together, having done over a bank. But honest, hard-working names. But Frank and Ron were like, probably 11, 12, 13, that kind of territory. Walked up the steps into this place and were immediately besotted by this brand spanking new stadium. And immediately my thought was, this is theirs.
Yeah.
They're coming here for another 50 years, not me. And they're not saying it's good, but it's not as good as that place I didn't really go to. It's not, doesn't happen. And then the slings of arrows, of outrageous fortune, they've had to take it all. And they don't mind that, which of course is the fundamental truth of being a football fan, isn't it? You've got to.
So what were your emotions on May the 10th, 2016, when West Ham are playing this last game at home against Man United?
Okay, well, that I was very excited to start with. Number one, because I managed to get my 3 sons in without season tickets, but it meant I needed to find a ticket somewhere else. So that I've got a picture of the top of my sons' heads who all got to go to the last game together. So we fundamentally all went together. And I got a terrible ticket in the back, in the corner. It was horrible, but I was there. That was the important thing. It was incredible. It was what you'd want to kind of leave the place with, thinking it. Under the lights at Upton Park has always been a bit of a thing, those evening games. And it was great. But what I did is I left at half time and went down the pub and watched the second half in the pub. because I didn't want to be around for the end.
Wow.
And because because what I literally did was walk down the steps and didn't look round. I walked down the steps, out the gates, along the Barking Road, and I never looked back because I didn't want to. Because I didn't want to feel. I didn't want feelings. If you know what I mean. I thought I'm done. And what so the kids met me in the pub afterwards. I saw a magnificent comeback win, which was crucial to the season. It was crucial to the occasion. I saw it in my local pub because I was living in Canning Town in those days as well. And so for me, I had the perfect night, but not what you would call the kind of exemplary version of the way it should be.
You didn't want to catch the emotions, but come on.
Yeah,
man.
I don't know how to deal with them. I'm useless at emotions, so I thought I'd best just avoid them.
But did you have a lump in your throat nevertheless?
Yeah. It's probably why I left. Probably because it was all a bit too much.
Yeah, because you don't want to be caught on camera with smoke getting in your eyes, do you?
No,
do you know what I mean?
It's not a good look.
TV. Yeah, no.
Again, but
we'd still be playing it. We'd still be playing it now, all these years later.
Yeah, but I think it was just that thing is that I wanted to walk away remembering it how I'd lived it.
Of course.
And to physically be there at the end, it wouldn't have given me that. It would, it's very funeraric, isn't it?
The problem with all these goodbyes is that they're much more potent. They're much more powerful than the experience you've had of, enjoying the time together. The goodbye is always the one that you're going to remember.
Smokey Robinson, what's so good
about a goodbye?
Good about goodbye.
Yeah, I don't know.
Listen, if the poet said it, then who are any of us to judge?
Yeah, of course. And it's like a funeral, isn't it? Leaving a dearly beloved, it's friend. I think the football ground is a friend.
I'll go family because you do have to have you've got to take the rough with the smooth with family.
Is it family or home? Family or home?
I'll go with, as I say, go with family based on the fact is that it doesn't matter how bad things get, it's still family, and I think that was kind of how how your football ground is with you. I mean, because this is I'm so wanted to ask because Tim, you'll experience this through South American football and obviously the transition then into Europe and stuff like that. Is my sense is they're not quite so precious about. I mean, of course, there are many iconic football stadia there, but it's across Europe and I think even in South America, shared stadium, which of course is a concept that one was there not going to be a Liverpool super stadium and it's just blue one week and red the next and no one's going to mind really. You can't see it work exactly. Yeah. Are we particularly obsessed here? Do you think in Britain about it?
There is a clear comparison with Argentina, where the mentality is exactly the same. I mean, San Lorenzo, one of the traditional big clubs in Argentina, the Pope's club, they got in financial problems and they had to sell their ground, and it became a big supermarket. And one of the great players in there, San Filippo, great centre forward, he used to go into the supermarket and recreate his goals. But for years now,
there's a header in aisle 4.
He should have taken a crowd with him. Taken a crowd with him, cheering.
Wow. There were people there just watching San Filippo recreate his goal in a supermarket, and they wandered for a little bit, and then they had their own stadium, but it's not exactly in their neighbourhood, so it's not good. It's not. So for years now, and it looks like they're succeeding. They've been mobilising to go back to their original home, to go back to buy up that land where the supermarket was. I think it's now closed, and buy up and then go. And the fans have been out marching for the right to return to their home. So there are so many similarities in that case, in that sense, between English and Argentine football, where the idea of home, this is our home,
right.
But I've always felt West Ham was an extreme example in English football because of that kind of village, that kind of village mentality.
I think Tottenham was the same when I grew up. Kids nowadays can't imagine. I know kids hang around football stadiums or whatever. But this was like the backdrop to our playground. You know, the walls of the stadium. We were leaning up against the walls. You know, rather than across the road. It was kind of like almost part of, you know, our homes. It was, or our hangouts or whatever. It meant so much to us. And I've said to you a few times, Tim, that when I grew up in Tottenham, you wouldn't see a single Arsenal shirt in Tottenham. It's not saying you couldn't, but you just wouldn't, you know. And I lived on one side of the road. It's not saying I couldn't have supported Arsenal like the people on the other side of the road. It's just like, but you didn't, you know, because you lived on this side of the road, and the kids that you met on this side of the road, they just absorbed you.
This is such a great example of what Mark's been talking about change. Because then, you know, people have this idea of that's the way it was and that's the way it always was. But obviously isn't the case, is it? Because, you only take it back 2 generations and Arsenal are on the other side of the river. So, so traditions are always being recreated and remade. And there's this perennial mistake of thinking that that's how it always was and how it always should be. It's never been the way. There's always a dynamic of change. As the great Gil Scott-Heron said, change is inevitable. So what we have to do is direct the change, you know, because it's always going to happen one way or another.
Makes sense. And of course, you know, his dad was a decent footballer. Indeed. So that makes absolute sense to me entirely. Out the window here, this will be a special moment for anyone who doesn't know my part of West London. That bus stop, which my thumb is pointing at, you can get the 237 there. And in 10 minutes' time, you'd be at Brentford's new ground. And if we're talking about an example of change that has worked, I'm sure there were plenty of Brentford fans for whom Griffin Park, which is very nearby, were saying, well, listen, but Brentford are now a punchy Premier League side. And it's fundamentally because they gave themselves the chance to grow and improve and built themselves a not ambitious, a not elaborate, a smart little football ground right next door to Kew Bridge. And it's worked. It's working.
Taking advantage of the Isleworth mass, that the mass ranks of fans from Isleworth.
In an area where there's been gentrification. I don't think you can escape, certainly with the London clubs that have moved or improved stadiums, there is a correlation between the area that they live in. I mean, Tottenham, for example, you know, the big controversy over the London Stadium before you finally sealed the deal, West Ham sealed the deal, was that Tottenham didn't want to be in Tottenham. Pissed me off to hear it.
Yeah.
Tottenham didn't want to be in Tottenham. They'd bought up so much of the landscape around them. Every shop that came up for sale, every house that came up to, they just buy them up and they bought it up. So they had plans before the London Stadium became available to expand the stadium or to build a new stadium. And literally, you know, for a block this way and that way and that way, everything was boarded up, waiting for, you know, the moment. And then the London Stadium came up and Tottenham decided, let's abandon ship. Because you see, at the time, Tottenham was a run-down part of London, very run-down by this stage. We'd had a riot there, obviously. Tottenham didn't play the part that I think it should have been, leadership part at that time. But funny enough, the irony is now they built the stadium for the future and the whole area, I'm not saying everybody, but the whole area is being gentrified. Like I'm seeing it before my eyes. I saw these old, it's funny, they're like a Cockney family, but a blended Cockney family. You know, there were some black ones, there were some white ones, there was some, you know, mixed heritage ones and everything, who run a pub right across the road from the Tottenham Stadium, right across the road. And they booked my missus and Janet Kay to play there. And the woman came up to us. They had this, like, above the pub, they had all these rooms like pubs used to have in the old days, you know. They were letting houses to a certain extent, as you know. and they have these rooms. So they use one of the rooms as a kind of like a dressing room for Janet. And what it was it was a little flat. It was like a little Airbnb flat. And the woman came up to us and said, yeah, during the pandemic, we realised, look, the pub business, it was almost dying. We didn't know what we were going to do, and we had a family meeting, which pleased me, because she was like a white woman, and her aunt was this black woman. So, it's my auntie's birthday, your auntie, and it's this black woman. So, but anyway, they had a family meeting, and they decided, well, look at that Tottenham Stadium over there, right across the road. Look at that Tottenham Stadium. They turned there's 7 rooms or so that they've got there into Airbnbs, just like studios or maybe 1 bedrooms at the most. And they said they can't book enough people.
Wow,
or they haven't got the rooms to book all the people who want to, because people come particularly from overseas to come and see Tottenham. They want to be right across the road to the stadium. They might want to go into town later on, but they want to come straight from their house to the stadium and vice versa.
And back. Not to mention NFL games that they play there,
of
concerts
course,
that are on there.
Beyonce.
That's the important thing about what they've done with.
And again, the dynamic had changed because
yes.
when the club's founded in the late 19th century, that area is pretty much rustic. It's full of fields and stuff, Yeah. So the dynamic of change is always with us, which doesn't mean we have to accept every change.
No, okay. True.
This particular change, going back to the match itself, May the 10th, 2016. What do you remember about the match itself?
Or what do you remember about the scenes before the match?
Vivid. Because they'd made an absolute pig's ear of the whole thing. It kicked off 45 minutes late, I think, in the end. Me and my sons were walking along Barking Road, arriving at the T-junction, which is Green Street, and then the ground is over there to your right-hand side. We arrive at the moment the Manchester United team bus is endeavouring to turn left into Green Street to get into the ground. And immediately thinking, who walked this one through? Who thought this would be a great time to drive the opposition up there? And then what goes with that is the levels of stupidity that you can attach to some football fans. Is the story, of course, is that they started throwing bottles at the Manchester United coach and hit the Manchester United coach. Not everyone was that good. A lot of bottles just flew over the coach and landed on or at people's feet.
Yeah.
So basically, West Ham fans were bottling other West Ham fans. And I'm sure they go, I'm terribly sorry. My aim was not true. I'm sure they say exactly like that, wouldn't they? But of course that's not the point, because it shouldn't have been happening. And just because they were rubbish at throwing doesn't preclude the fact that they shouldn't have been throwing in the first place. We all know that. Equally, you've got a kettled bottleneck situation, a scrum of football fans, in which you plop a luxury coach full of millionaire footballers from the north. I mean, nitro meat glycerine. It's just nuts. Nuts.
Yeah, I've seen the scene from inside the Man United coach of Jesse Lingard, getting all excited by being bottled by, or the coach being bottled or whatever.
Okay, one way of dealing with it.
He ended up playing for your lot after a couple of years season. After that. Anyway, so he had a good one, didn't he? Okay, from after that though, there was a match to be played. Mark Noble's the captain. What an honour for him as well. Coming, local boy coming from down the road.
Honour for us, I'd also say, for that reason.
Agree. I would agree. But you could see the pride in his face as they're lining up. Yeah. You could see the utter pride and emotion starting to creep in. I mean, smoke does get in his eyes slightly at the end, but you can see when the camera is panning on the two teams lining up, I can only imagine what's going on in his mind, but he's totally focused on whatever the mission is. It was an important game for both teams. Manchester United needed to get in the top 4 and West Ham needed to make it into Europe. And it seemed like you were on your way with what I think is like a dream goal from your centre forward, Mikel Antonio.
Yeah,
Sorry, that was the second goal, wasn't he? That was the second goal.
Sacco scored the first goal, gave us the lead there, and then we're 2-1 down with sort of an hour to go. And then a man who's made himself part of folklore at West Ham, Mikel Antonio, and done it the hard way by playing in something like 14 different positions on the outfield because no one quite knew where he was meant to play. Comes up with a header in which unusually you'll notice from the knee downwards his legs are actually horizontal with the floor. It's that kind of leap. It's almost a slam. It's almost an above the rim NBA dunk kind of leap that gets the job done. And that's 2-2. And then our brilliant New Zealand centre half Winston Reid, whose career was somewhat curtailed by injury, not long afterwards, pops up with a winner with David De Gea punching it in the net, which became quite the thing for him, didn't it? Yeah. And luckily, and I like to think it started there. So, but it all came out. It came out in the washout. It came out perfectly in the end, didn't it? Because United won the cup, and we snuck through the back door into Europe, into the Europa League. But my abiding memory, or the transitional memory of that, is the man you've mentioned, Mark Noble, whose presence to this day is the catalyst that no one else, pretty much in or around the club, can be. He made the transition feel real and right. He was there. He was there and important during struggling when the team was struggling. As soon as he retired, we totally lost that presence on the field. But he's becoming that presence inside the club itself. But the person I think of in terms of this as the absolute curve is our gaffer Slaven Bilic, who is patently a man who manages with his heart on his sleeve. He's running on so much emotion and adrenaline in his coaching. If ever we got lucky, might be the right word, to have a man like that to ride the roller coaster of a final season at the football club. He was perfect, and he exuded that presence. Come the end of his time at the Olympic Stadium, London Stadium as now is, he was bent double on the touchline. His back had gone, and the Slaven Bilic you saw was effectively doubled over with his hands on his knees watching the game. And if you wanted a physical symbol of the way it was going on the field of play, it was Slaven barely able to stand up. But thank God he was there. It's almost impossible to think of another man who was going to be the right man for that very specific job. And he was there. And as I say, he's written himself into our history as a direct result of that.
The thing that struck me watching it was how good the West Ham side was.
Yeah.
No, Andy Carroll on his day was
unplayable.
Yeah, he was. And, Dimitri Payet, who was a hero there for a while.
I remember those 5 minutes. They were great.
Yeah, it was very, very classy.
And Lanzini.
Yeah, Lanzini.
Our midfield fundamentally consisted of two tiny playmakers who like to run with the ball and create openings. And which seems like an indulgence now, but they were fundamental to it, as indeed was Cote, who was the man who would therefore be the rock and would hold. But I think I agree with you. It was a team that was worthy of being what we ended up being, which is a European team the season before, a top half, a nudging well into the top half that particular season. And it's just a shame that what they couldn't do is they just couldn't maintain it and knock at the manager. But I agree with you. They were proper fun times. And Dimitri Payet and his pomp is arguably they're the seasons that have given me as much joy as any in sort of the last decade or two.
Yeah, a match like this.
There is a striking thing here, which I think fits into the overall context. You're looking at this team, and you're thinking this is a good, attractive team, sustained by a club whose stadium is Upton Park. You're going to a stadium where you're more than doubling your capacity, so you're going to have a much, much better team And I know a lot of West Ham fans feel kind of betrayed by what's happened subsequently.
I just don't think they've worked out the formula that says how to remember what we are. How do we bottle the essence of what we were when we were doing well and having. I mean, and by the way, when I say doing well, you pointed out earlier, Tim, this is sporadic doing well. This is not some kind of like great long sways of doing well. This is like moments of joy and peak, mixed in with great Harry Redknapp years. You're watching great football, don't win much, if anything at all. But we're used to that as part of our brief. What the size of the stadium implied was that you're going to get the size of footballer that goes with it, which basically means transfer fees, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't know that we've as yet really got the infrastructure right in terms of who's scouting, who's buying, who's doing deals, who's being bought for who. Is the manager picking, or are they picking for the manager? I don't know that we've yet got that formula perfect. Except bizarrely enough, you end up winning a European Cup with a man who was rejected and came back to save the day. The least likely figure to be sexy new London Stadium West Ham becomes our most successful manager ever. Probably fair enough.
Nah, Ron, you're not going to take Ron.
Yeah, I know.
Well, we know that West Ham have had their success over the years. The fantasy, the dream match that we've been watching, 3-1 to the Irons.
3-2.
3-2, forgive me, 3-2 to the Irons.
It's much more exciting than that.
Against
Scary than that,
Well, yeah. This was a fantasy, wasn't it? To leave your stadium with a victory like this was a kind of fantasy. When you have to make a choice between one fantasy or the other, which is a fantasy you would choose? A fantasy of playing your last game at Upton Park with a victory against Manchester United, or the fantasy, and let me stress that word a little bit more, the fantasy of winning the World Cup in 1966? Because apparently...
So it literally happened.
Apparently they allowed a domestic club, to actually play in the World Cup that year, apparently.
Of course, it's the one that I could physically experience. Even I'm too young to be able to lay hands, like actual hands, on the 1966 World Cup win, even though, as I said earlier, my dad seems to think it's driven me and my brother's entire adult life, apart from that little bit. But no, it's that last... Well, listen, this is the joy of it, is I've been a West Ham fan that long, and I watched us win a European Cup game with my sons and my grandsons all sat together, watching the game, thinking, oh, God, it's going to extra time and penalties, which is just code for we're not winning this cup final. And Jarrod Bowen comes up with a late winner. And to be in the presence of my family for that moment, albeit in a back garden in West London, was special. But equally, just to have been there on that night for what has become known as Farewell Upton Park, of course I had to, even if I kind of didn't want to, because as I say earlier, I'm not emotionally built for dealing with situations like that.
Mate, I know. We've been talking football. We needs must to tick the boxes of the World Football. To tick the boxes of the Brazilian shirt name, even we needs must talk a little bit of music if we've got you, because you're a music critic amongst other things. The charts at the time was pretty.
I have a point I'd like to make here, which hopefully will be more interesting than most of the chart. I'm fascinated, absolutely fascinated by, Mark, you talking about your difficulty of dealing with emotion. You're not good with emotion, and as soon as you said it, because you are most known for a fabulous body of work, especially with Black American music.
Yeah, that's my world, totally.
And as soon as you said it, I thought of Dave Grodin, who was a key figure in promoting Black American music in England. Invented the term Northern Soul. Went out and paid by Motown to meet all the people in the mid 60s and so on. And something that he said about the importance, and it is massive, this bond between British culture, especially working class culture, and Black American music. And he pinpointed, I think, exactly the dilemma that you raised, Mark. He said, you know why this works? Because it's an audience which is emotionally repressed, which doesn't deal well with emotions. And this music allows emotionally repressed people to get in touch with emotions that they wouldn't otherwise get in touch with.
It's our license to let it all go, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're so right. I agree with you completely. I don't have any problem with it in that context. You're totally right, because it's not me. It's almost indirect. It's, and I know the joy of great music. I also know that I believe that I listen and love the greatest music art form that's ever been invented on the planet, which is a broad stroke, which comes up from South America and across from Africa and lands in North America and has got European influence. I know all of this, but I also know what the fundamental truth is about what I think is great music. If you're therefore alluding to the chart, I don't know anyone in that top 10. I like that. I got no beef with Drake. That's for other people. But he was number one, wasn't he?
He was number one. Yeah, he's number one. He's currently obviously involved in court cases rather than in eating beef in itself. But you've heard of Justin Timberlake. He's at number 3. He's a soul boy, isn't he?
He's okay. He's got a lovely dancer and superb on his DUI. I thought, he moved very well for a drunk man. So,
when do you think? Because you would have followed Black American music through the ages. When did you lose a connection with it? When did the contemporary stuff stop resonating to the extent that it used to resonate?
I don't think it has, and this goes actually straight back to the conversation we're having about this is the only way football's ever been. It was never different before. It's never going to be different afterwards. I'm comfortable with the change. It's a lineage. I get that. The Calvin Harris tune that Rihanna's done on there is a great dance tune. I know exactly where that comes from in my kind of musical world.
Exactly. Yeah. The Beyonce, she's all over it because she's got a new album out at this point, but number 24, Hold Up. That's a proper gangster bad boy tune that could balance or could find its way in reggae dancehall, and could find its way in hip hop of today. Both, and that's what she's doing. She's straddling both, bringing all aspects of culture, whether it be country music, as we've seen her do more recently. But here she's doing.
Yeah, on that note, I should say to him, I probably have lost that. If you're asking me where did I lose it, it might have been at Beyonce's country album. I think that one may have been a bridge too far for me.
You could, like Justin Bieber says, in my view, his best tune at number 27. Love yourself, man. Love yourself. If you want to look in the mirror and say how gorgeous you are, love yourself. Don't worry about it. There are a couple of interesting things, if I might say, a couple of reimaginations of at number 34, The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel, done by Disturbed. I don't know if you guys got up to this point, because it sounds like you both sort of banding the charts very early on.
I've never seen a list of names that I had no idea what were, and I know that's about as old man as life gets.
Man.
I think it's a particularly terrible chart for it. I really do.
There's a couple of Craig Davids in there. There's a Tiny Temper in there. There's a lot for R&B fans. Skepta's all over it. Okay, hip hop, rap.
So East London's representing. So that's good news for me.
Exactly. No. It's a fair point. Yeah, London's representing, together with Pharrell Williams at number 69 amongst her. Then Adele's there, and I know you soul purists aren't going to sort of embrace her as a soul icon, are you?
Well, Tottenham as well, wasn't she? I mean, she doesn't stand a chance with me.
She went to the same junior school as I did, So please don't knock her. Yeah,
Not at the same time she didn't. I'm telling you
no,
that.
No, she didn't. Otherwise, if she did, she's saying hello to me at number 92. If she did go to the same school, okay, fair enough. It's not your generation, so we may as well call it a day. It's been excellent speaking to you, Mark, Tim as well. We talked about an amazing match, 10th of May 2016, when the Irons said goodbye to what will forever now be known, not as Upton Park, but as something called the Berlin Ground.
Yes.
Oh, no, well, we're going to miss the Berlin Ground. Fuck was that?